Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Creating and Sustaining Family Partnerships and Distance Learning, a professional learning series from ELRISE. We're so excited to have you here today. I was watching people come into the room and I recognized some names from yesterday and some from previous webinars, and I also saw some new names. So those of you who've been with us before, you know that my name is Charisse. I'm here today with my SEAL colleagues, Jaylene Shelby and Adriana Diaz, both program specialists. Like I shared before, we work for the Sobrato Early Academic Language Model, also known as SEAL. And SEAL, we have a mission to prepare all English learners in California to learn, thrive, and lead. We're excited to share strategies, tools, and resources as part of our collaboration with ELRISE. Now, for those of you who've been on multiple webinars, you could probably go through these slides for me. But for those of you that are new, I want to give you a little bit of background. So ELRISE stands for English Learner Roadmap Implementation for Systemic Excellence, which refers, of course, to the California English Learner Roadmap, adopted unanimously by the California State Board of Education on July 2017, just 3 short years ago, as the new English learner policy for California, superseding Proposition 227, which had been the state's English learner policy for over 20 years. Aspirational and comprehensive, the EL roadmap consists of 4 principles that are to guide local programs, policies, instruction, and planning for English learners throughout California. It calls upon every educator, school, and district in the state to work towards enacting assets-oriented and need-responsive schools that embrace the cultures and languages of our students, to provide meaningful access to the full curriculum through engaging in high-quality intellectual work with sufficient scaffolds and supports for full English learner participation. And it calls upon our systems to provide the conditions that make such education possible. These principles are research-based and guide us to best practices and are an important foundation as we work to strengthen English learner education, even now as we face the challenges of how best to meet the needs of English learners during pandemic conditions and through distance learning. And from what I'm hearing from around the state, some of you have gone back to the classroom and are now in a hybrid model. So, if you need more information about the roadmap, there's going to be some links in the chat to the roadmap policy itself and to this infographic that you can download. And we also encourage you to visit CDE's website for more information. So, as part of the state support for enacting the English Learner Roadmap, the legislature and the California Department of Ed funded 2 educator workforce incentive grants, one of which is ELRISE. These are the goals of the grant. Today, we're going to focus on these 2. Building skills and strategies to implement evidence-based practices. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how we promote, design, and sustain the sustainability of research-based language acquisition programs, including dual language programs. So here's the big picture. This is a 3-year grant. And over the course of those 3 years, we're going to be working in partnership with your County Office of Education to provide many opportunities and resources for professional learning, such as webinars, institutes, and someday live workshops for multiple roles, including teachers, administrators, families, counselors, on various topics related to implementing the EL roadmap. And these include topics such as integrated and designated ELD, building strong dual language programs, meeting the needs of long-term English learners, all meant to support you in implementing the California English Learner Roadmap. So watch for what's coming your way. And now I'm going to turn it over to Adriana, who's going to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Shelly said, I'm Adriana Diaz. Myself and my co-presenter, Jaylene Shelby, are so happy to have you here with us today. We will also have our colleague, Katie Mlocker, also monitoring the chat for any questions that you might have. I first just want to give you a really big thank you for the endless effort and dedication to your students that I'm sure you are in the middle of doing every single day. I may not know you, personally, but with this little piece that I do know of you as this teacher, educator, and hero, I know you are fighting the good fight and doing as much as you can with as much grace as you can muster during this time. Secondly, I just want to thank you for your dedication to family partnership. The fact that you are here when I'm sure you have a long list of other to-dos that you can be doing tells me that you have a desire and want to foster strong relationships with families. So thank you again. Even more in our current time, this demands us to be able to really figure out how to do this family partnership thing. For the first time, many of our teachers are literally in the middle of living rooms, giving you a glimpse into those family dynamics, sometimes more than we might want. And in this unprecedented time, this is an immense opportunity that we need to not just step into, but really leverage as much as possible. Our webinar is in response to this call. This is our agenda for the day. We have a full session that we are excited to share with you. We have been very intentional with our plan in the hopes that you will walk away with a renewed dedication to family partnerships and with some concrete strategies, resources, and tools that you can put into action right away. Also at the end of the session, we will have a feedback form for you. We genuinely reflect upon what you write and really take that into consideration as we move through the rest of our webinars. So now, we wanted to give you a chance just to start with thinking in terms of putting something in the chat box. So with our current situation, we would love to hear what is one of the most effective ways that you have found to connect to families at the start of this school year. We invite you to share in the chat and maybe even get some ideas from your other colleagues. So we will give you a minute to share some information in the chat. Thank you for sharing. I'm looking through them right now. You guys are doing some amazing things. Mrs. Trone, one-on-one Zoom meetings with families and students, amazing. You are ahead of the game already for some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Teresa Bandy's talking about talking points, one-on-one Zoom meetings also, that it is very time consuming. With phone calls home and virtual back to school nights, Ms. Martinez, or Mr. Martinez, sorry, Alonso. So yes, we know that this is a challenge and it takes a lot of effort. And so our hope is that today is going to give you some of these strategies to be able to put into action right away, like we said. Okay, thank you for sharing. As we move into our presentation, we wanted to take a moment to emphasize why we choose the actual wording of family partnership. I'm sure we have all had the experience that it is not always a parent we interact with, and maybe even more so during distance learning. It could be a grandparent, an aunt, an older sibling, and even a daycare provider. We want to honor all those people that form each child's inner circle. Therefore, we use the word family to honor all those other people that love and care for the students. We also feel that in our current state, the word engagement isn't really enough. As much as families need each of you to provide instruction, teachers are also dependent on families to make this happen. We have gone beyond just wanting to engage with our families and letting them know we're available, but instead now we really need to make this a priority to create this successful environment that we want. We feel the word partnership encompasses this and the reciprocal relationship that it needs. In a partnership, there needs to be mutual cooperation, mutual responsibility, and mutual respect. And our focus of family partnership also aligns and is rooted in the EL Roadmap's Principle 1, assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, which specifically calls for schools to value and build strong family and school partnerships. It also addresses Principle 2, which is specifically Area A, that also reminds us that the language and culture that English learners and their families bring to education is an asset for learning. So as we know the importance of incorporating the family into the equation, we've all seen this, but this pandemic has really forced all of us to reevaluate how we have done this and how much more crucial it is now. So we feel this pandemic, with all its challenges, has also offered us a wonderful opportunity, and fostering family partnership is definitely one of those. So then, knowing the context, what if we reimagine schooling to be a place where we attend to the needs of the whole child, first with which we know it includes family, where we engage in deep listening with our families that are struggling, but also we see the assets that they bring. And we know that there are many of them. So as stated here, what if we centralize relationships from the start of the school year and throughout, and make that a top priority, sparked by seeing families as our best resources, where families feel they and their children are valued, and where building relationships is the foundation to that long-term success. What if we build on these relationships to get to know our students, their families, and implement this information into our instruction that includes culturally responsive lessons, literature, activities, and interactions. And finally, what if from fostering relationships and making sure our students are seen in their instruction, we create this new normal where there is this reciprocal communication, where the school and family are working in tandem for the benefit of each student. We need to see our schools as community institutions, meeting the needs of the entire community with input from that community. So to help us reach these goals, we are offering 4 areas to explore today. The first we want to ground us in is the research and what that has told us around the challenges that we are facing during this time. Next, we will be offering strategies to start building these relationships and getting to better know your students and families. Next, we will talk about the the idea of community cultural wealth, and what your families offer and how to leverage those assets, including 2 strategies you can put into use. And finally, we will offer several strategies and resources to build our families as partners in learning. So to aid in processing of the information we will share with you today, we want to utilize a graphic organizer as a way to help you organize your thoughts and serve as a visual guide of our presentation. We welcome you to grab a piece of paper, fold it into 4s, nothing fancy. Or we have also, we will be adding a virtual graphic organizer link in the chat where you can open that document as a PDF and type directly into it. Either place serves as a space to jot down any reflections, anything that stands out that you would like to remember, or any questions that come up. We encourage you to write or even to add sketches to use both sides of your brain for processing. This, of course, is a strategy you can use with your students and can even be taped into a journal that they keep for their content. We will also offer our write-up for this strategy in our resources if you would like other ideas on how to utilize graphic organizers with your students. And we will prompt you as we go through all of our sections and give you a minute for processing as we go through our presentation. Okay, so we will begin with our first section, which will ground us in what the research tells us and the challenges facing our families and all of us. So specifically, we will be going over a few of the key findings from 3 specific surveys that we will also be sharing with you after our presentation. So these 3 surveys the first one is PIQE, Lifting Up Voices survey. It focused on general experiences with distance learning and basic needs, including access to internet, health insurance, a bunch of different things. Also, the Educational Trust West Listening to Parents survey focused on capturing parent concerns during the coronavirus pandemic. And the third is Common Sense report, which just came out on August 31st, and it's focused on capturing the amplified issue of the digital divide. A cross-section of families were surveyed, but we are focusing on some of the results directly impacting English learner population. After, we will also talk about the critical conditions for English learners during distance learning that we are addressing in this webinar. So the first piece of research, I'm going to read the question. So the question asked was, has your child's school or teacher communicated information regarding online classes or distance learning? The good news is that yes, a lot of students and families are saying that they have received communication, which is great. The concerning part is that only 31% actually understood the instructions. So this is a good reminder of 2 things. First, we want to make sure our communication is clear and translated to make sure all our families understand it. And second, by building these family partnerships, families will then feel more comfortable to ask questions and for clarity, which saves you time down the road. We also have some suggestions to aid in this that we will share with you today. The next piece of research asked if your child is an English learner, if he or she received the support needed. As you can see, almost half said no. All families right now are concerned about educational loss during COVID, but for English learner families, this concern is amplified, especially when many do not have the language to voice their concerns or are fearful to do so. We will offer solutions to this today as well. The next one asked, do you have an email address that you use? The response showed that still 1 in 3 families did not have email addresses. An added challenge that teachers have experienced is even when families have had email addresses, it wasn't always a Gmail account, which is needed for different apps used in the school. Making sure our families have all the tools needed to stay in communication with the school is crucial, but also something that is completely possible to solve. Next one, we have 2 more that we're sharing. We know this digital divide has always been there. This pandemic has just amplified it and forced schools to finally address it. So this statistic shows how much of an issue it still is across the entire United States. We can see it as a bigger challenge in rural areas and higher with marginalized groups. The other result that I wanted to point out that stood out to me is that for the first time, this survey also researched how many teachers are also struggling with access and found that up to 400,000 teachers also didn't have internet. So I averaged out, with a class size of even 25, that translates to a possible 10 million students impacted. So still a big thing. And finally, this slide also stood out to me. This slide shows the 3 states with the largest population of students without adequate connection. And who is the second worst? But good old California. As the richest state and home to the largest tech companies in the world, we still have not prioritized access to the internet for all. An issue that has been ignored, now with COVID, has amplified tenfold and demanded immediate results that just were not available when March came around. The results of this neglect have created situations like this. Some of you might have seen this picture. This is 2 little girls that were found at a local Taco Bell in Salinas, California over here, trying to access their free Wi-Fi. Now, there are 2 main things I want to say about this. First, when first seeing this picture, my initial question was, what created this situation? And what if this family of these girls felt that they could address these issues with their school? We obviously don't know the details, but at the end of the day, this is the reality for this family. Of course, as soon as the picture was shared on social media, Salinas School District immediately responded and stated they would make sure these girls have everything they need so that this is not the only option they have. The second thing that I want to point out is the resiliency of these girls to try and still receive their education, no matter how they had to do it. We will be talking about resiliency in our next section and how to amplify these things that families figure out how to get around. They get creative and they figure out how to deal with whatever current situation they have. I doubt these girls or their families want you to feel pity for them, but instead I want us to be able to see the strength and desire they had to still learn with these challenges. So it's a good reminder for us as we go through the day today. To help address these many challenges that have been magnified during distance learning, ELRISE has compiled a set of foundational truths, or what we call critical conditions, geared to English learners in distance learning. These are all based on decades of research. They're also in direct response to the EL roadmap and the need to implement that roadmap across California. We're going to drop the link for this document in the chat, but also know we will be sending this as a resource at the end of the webinar. The document outlines 11 critical conditions with descriptions of each, along with strategies that encompass each. So your virtual page that you will get actually has links to all of these different resources. Today, for the focus of our presentation, we will be focusing on 5 critical conditions. We will be focusing on the first 4, and we will be focusing on 11. So I am going to go into a little bit more detail of each of them to give you an idea of how they connect to our presentation today. So the first critical condition is to invest in relationships and build community. It directly aligns with Principle 1 from the EL roadmap. It's important we commit and create the mechanisms for knowing students and their families in terms of who they are, what they are experiencing, and what they need. When we break down the walls and develop relationships, we can then create safe, affirming, inclusive communities. Knowing our students, we emphasize collectivist cultural practices, which include the necessity for collaboration, interaction, and meaningful relationship building. And as we invest in relationships and build this community, language will develop more powerfully because it has meaning and is purposeful. I also want to point out, you will see the green circles throughout our presentation as we go through that will connect to the practices and the strategies that we will be sharing with you today. So the second critical condition is affirm identity, which you can see relates to principles 1 and 2. We are multifaceted, multi-layered. Our identities are fluid and flexible, and as teachers, we embrace all our students' identities and values that they bring to us. We acknowledge that our identities grant us a complexity of privileges and/or disadvantages, some more than others. Families bring assets and a wealth of knowledge. We affirm their identity by leveraging what families have to offer, linguistically, familial, and social. So the third critical condition is supporting home language. When we make sure all information going home is translated, this is supporting home language. When we let students and families know that it isn't just all right, but that they are encouraging conversations about school content to be done in the home language, you are shifting the perception around the importance of home language. This also becomes more crucial in an SEI classroom in order to stop home language loss. We want to share a short clip from one of our SEAL videos. SEAL has a YouTube page with several videos produced for the sole purpose of contributing to the field and making them available to everyone. Several have a focus around the importance of family partnership. They can all be found on SEAL's YouTube page, which we will also share with you in your resources. So I want to give you a little bit of frame of reference for the video because we took it right from the middle of a video. The focus is on supporting home language, and we are showing you just about a minute that emphasizes the crucial role families play in contributing to speaking to their children in their home language, and the teacher's part in communicating the importance of doing this. Speaking is the founder of SEAL, Lori Olson. Lori is a leading researcher for English learners and developed the SEAL model in response to her research on long-term English learners. And she is currently the director of design for ELRISE. So we're going to show you that video real quick.
The teacher isn't able to speak the language of the child, we can't be teaching and developing that home language. Families have to do that. And so the partnership with families is absolutely essential in this case, because they're the only ones, if a child is in English taught classrooms, who can really see to it that kids are using that language and developing that language and using it in many different contexts and learning new vocabulary. So the family part is reading to their children in their home language, knowing about the topics that are being studied in the classroom, be engaged in projects, home projects related to what's happening in school in the home language, and seeing to it that that value and that sense of connection that only comes through home language is really being nurtured. Too often, parents will feel the best thing I can do for my child is encourage them in English, they need English, they need English, without recognizing their essential task in supporting home language. And the way that they're going to understand that without knowing the research that teachers may have is if teachers take on the job of partnering with families so that they do understand. The teacher isn't able.
So I just also want to say that as teachers, we can create this shift to help families understand that home language loss no longer needs to be a sacrifice for their children to succeed in school or to be able to learn English, but instead serves as an enormous asset in their children's development of English and of all their learning. So we have 2 more to cover. The fourth critical condition is making learning relevant. By making learning relevant, we seek to understand our students' realities and make connections to them connected to the content. It's also critical that we provide a curriculum in which students see their lives and experiences reflected, to provide space for dialogue and sharing of who they are and the kind of conditions they are experiencing. A curriculum that is exploratory, reflective, inquiry-based, and connected to issues that matter to them and their community is what motivates and engages our students and also makes our family family partners in this process. The last critical condition that we will address today is ensuring access and disrupting inequity. We are striving for equity always in our classrooms, but especially now when with all the disparities that have been, everything has been amplified, it takes all of our efforts to not leave any student or any family behind. By providing primary language curriculum and support as much as we can, by checking on families that drop off the radar and asking how you can help, and providing flexibility to ensure all students can participate and families can contribute, this is how we are ensuring access and creating equity. Okay, so we have set you up. These are all of the critical conditions, once again, that you will see a thread throughout all of our, the rest of our presentation today. So now, we want to give you a moment just to reflect on this research. We share it along with the critical conditions. This is an opportunity for you to think about it in your graphic organizer. So this would be that top left corner. And the 2 prompts that we have to help with this is, think about what data surprised you and what you would want to share with somebody else. Also think of one way in your current practice that you can elevate home language. So I'm going to give you a minute to be able to think about it. Please feel free to share in the chat if you would like. If not, you can always just use your graphic organizer. Thank you for giving yourselves a moment to think about this. I will now pass it over to Jaylene, who will talk to us about knowing your students and families.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for that quick foundation, sharing the most recent research of why this is all so important. As educators, we understand how important it is to get to know our students, and I'll offer that it's just as important to get to know their families to really be able to engage with them as partners in learning. So there's many ways to get to know your families, of course, and build that relationship. And right now, I'm just going to quickly share 2 strategies that can be incorporated throughout the year: family interviews and family-centered goal setting. If you joined us for the first ELRISE webinar, we did share this strategy and highlighted the family interview as one way to strengthen relationships. So I hope you can find another takeaway or motivation to engage in this strategy. I can share several stories, as I'm sure you can too, about how after a long phone call between a teacher and a family member, participation in distance learning dramatically increased. These interview questions can be a tool for connecting with and learning more about the families that you serve. So this is just one piece in the process to building relationships with your families and really seeing what they bring to your classroom community. As you've started the year, you've probably already done a simple survey to find out what mode of communication works best, what times are available, etc. So keeping all of that in mind, conducting this type of informal interview can help open the door to learning more about your students' families in order to make their child's education more culturally relevant, which is the critical condition number 4 that Adriana mentioned. The goal is to learn about the funds of knowledge that a family brings to the family-school partnership. And to learn about these funds, to deeply know them, we have to dedicate some time and make space, as many of you already are doing, as you mentioned in those one-on-one calls. Just a note that surveys can help us organize our groups and get the community going by getting us that basic information, but surveys need to be connected to regular and deep communication opportunities where you're really taking the time with the family to get to know them. This is an asset-based approach focused on a 2-way conversation and gives you some prompts and questions that you can ask. In the beginning, some educators may feel a little uncomfortable asking some of the questions because they may see them as intrusive. But what we know is that in order to learn about our families and really support them, we need to know the responses to these questions. Once we know the family's responses, we can stop blaming and start partnering with them. While there's no one way to conduct these interviews, we do recommend that if a family has more than one child at a school site, the interview is done with all of the teachers at the same time with the family, avoiding the family having to share that same information over and over. The last piece to start to build trust is to start to build trust before you do the interview if you haven't already. Check in on the basics first. Do they need a device, internet, school supplies, etc.? So let's take a moment to just think about how you might use this information once you've gathered it from the interviews. If you know me, which many of you do not, you would know that I like to spend time outside in our yard. And this is a photo here of my son Nathaniel when he got some new gloves, and he was excited to help me plant some ferns in our little patio garden. As a parent, if I was given the opportunity to share this love of gardening, I would be happy to share our experience with the class, as relevant, of course, maybe during an ecosystems unit. And how lovely for Nathaniel to see his mom not just as the one who makes him dinner and can't keep all the superheroes straight, but as a featured speaker or a plant expert during class. Gathering this type of invisible information is the first step, and then it's critical to circle back and find creative ways to incorporate and leverage those family assets throughout the year. You'll find the strategy write-up and some of the sample questions in the resources that we share after the webinar today. The next offering is family-centered goal setting. All too often, our system treats families as liabilities rather than assets, but the truth is, while teachers are the experts on instructions, it's families who are the experts on our students. If there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it's that now more than ever, teachers are motivated to engage in effective, authentic family partnership. So we've intentionally named this family-centered goal setting to emphasize the collaboration required of the family, student, and teacher. Perhaps the most obvious way to tap into families' funds of knowledge is through this goal setting process. The research on the importance and impact of goal setting is abundant, yet few teachers incorporate goal setting into our regular classroom practice, even though every teacher wants to promote a growth mindset among their students. Perhaps we haven't found great success because we haven't partnered with the experts yet, the families and their students. Family-centered goal setting is a strategy designed to do just that. Goals are set in collaboration with the families and are chosen by the student. In addition to increasing educational outcomes, this structure has the added benefit of relationship building. Additionally, goal setting produces an increase in 18 to 41 percentage points in student learning gains. There's so many benefits to this strategy. So what type of goals are we really talking about? We know that it's not enough just to set goals. If we want to truly be effective, it must tap into these 4 elements. First, the goals chosen must provide the opportunity to build competence. That means that the goals should be have a mastery orientation and not be correlated to particular assessments. They also need to be specific, targeted, and achievable in a short period of time, say 4 to 6 weeks. Second, goal setting must give students autonomy and agency. The students get to choose the goals and they need to have value to the student. Third, the task related to the goal must cultivate interest. So in addition to allowing for student choice, students should be motivated to engage in the tasks it will take to achieve their goal. And finally, the goal and requisite tasks must be within reach so students can see their progress towards their goal and have confidence in their ability to do that new thing that they can't yet do. So next, just some additional tips for effective family-centered goal setting. We want to guide students to create these simple, targeted, short-term goals so they can easily see their progress. The key to success is regularly checking in with them and keep those check-ins short. Research indicates students should reflect daily, and also scheduling weekly student and teacher check-ins are ideal. Progress should be shared with families along the way, and mid-cycle family, student, teacher check-ins are critical so families continue to partner with the school. Don't be afraid to adjust expectations. If the goal feels more difficult than anticipated, that can shift. Students need to experience the benefit of perseverance through small successes. And of course, it's important to start with goals that relate to their daily life, not just school. Start by asking simple questions about what's hard for them right now and what they want to do better. Maybe they need to work on taking a shower or fixing their hair every day before their first class meeting. By making goal setting applicable beyond schoolwork, they'll see the value and develop that growth mindset that will transfer later to academics. Another tip is to make progress visual and celebrate their progress along the way. I'm not talking about a chart with names and numbers, but it does mean tracking collective progress so that we can see how each other are growing. Model, 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 and make it transparent how you set goals in your life. Name your challenges, voice over your goals, and be metacognitive about how your process goes alongside your students. Show them how this is done. It's good for them to see our progress, and hey, we might grow a little bit along the way. So, I know that was quick, but before I pass it back to Adriana, I just want to take a minute to jot down on your graphic organizer, what might your next step be? Is there a specific child or family that comes to mind to start with goal setting? Or how might you get those family interviews going? Go ahead and finish up your thought and then take it away, Adriana.
I wanted to mention that we are adding a sign-in sheet once again into the chat, just to be able to have you guys please sign up so that we can ensure that you receive all the resources from today. We want to make sure you get everything. The next area that we will cover is on community cultural wealth. This also aligns with Principle 1 around language and culture as assets within the EL roadmap. So specifically, we will cover what is community cultural wealth. I love this section, and why it is so important. We will also share 2 strategies that you can utilize to amplify this idea in your class. And finally, we will give you some processing time and some breakout groups to hopefully get some information from your colleagues. So the idea of community cultural wealth comes from researcher Tara Yoso. It's an asset-based ideology and is based in critical race theory. These forms of cultural wealth are outlined in her article titled Whose Culture Has Capital? It draws on the knowledge that students of color bring with them all this cultural wealth from their homes and communities into the classroom. The idea is, if we pull from these and leverage them as places to see the assets that our students and families bring, we can then create truly inclusive and culturally relevant classrooms. We will also be giving you access to this article in our resources, so I'm going to walk us through a quick description of each. So the first is aspirational. It refers to the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real and perceived barriers. The next is familial. It refers to these cultural knowledge, those cultural knowledges nurtured among familia or kin that carry a sense of community, history, memory, and cultural intuition. Next is social. It can be understood as networks of people and community resources. These peer and other social contexts can provide both instrumental and emotional support to navigate through society's institutions. The next is navigational. It refers to skills of maneuvering through social institutions. Next is resistance. It refers to those knowledges and skills fostered through oppositional behavior that challenges inequity. And the final one is linguistic. It refers to the idea that students of color arrive at school with multiple languages and community skills. I also want to point out 4 additional forms of community wealth that come from an article titled A Framework for Understanding Latino-Latina Cultural Wealth. Researchers studied the challenges Latinx students faced all the way into their transition into college. They found Yoso's 6 theories to ring true and identified 4 additional common themes that I really wanted to point out to you. The first is perseverance. This incorporates the ideas of determination, self-reliance to overcome challenges, and what is called ganas, or the will and desire to never give up. Next is ethnic consciousness. This amplifies the solidarity among Latina students based on a shared struggle. This includes a deep commitment to giving back to their families and their community. The idea that the group is more important than the self, and succeeding is really the accomplishment of not just the individual, but pride to the entire family and community. The third is a spiritual faith-based. This encompasses gratitude, compassion, a sense of purpose, and a strong sense of spirituality as a guide. Which is and then the final form is what is called pluriversal, which is the ability to make identity, language, and behavioral shifts in multiple social and academic spaces. This encompasses the ability to shift between what can feel like different worlds connected to identity, language, social, and academic spaces. Many of our marginalized students manage this every single day. As an English learner myself, this speaks really deeply to me. What my home life experience was with Spanish music playing in the background, speaking in Spanish, and being immersed in the pride of my culture and my family was in stark contrast to my school experience, where none of who I was really felt welcomed. Who I was not reflected in the books that we read, in the posters on the walls, or in the content that we covered. Even after learning English, this still required a daily shift from one world to another for me that I wasn't even aware that I was doing. It also is one that many English learner students still have to do every single day. And so I think it's important that we think about these. Instead, we can leverage these additional forms of community cultural wealth to make our students and their experience the center of our classrooms and the necessary avenue to connect content for them. I also want to point out that every person can see themselves in this cultural wealth assets idea in their own lives. And so I shared a little bit about my experience, and I wanted to invite you to answer this question for yourselves as well. You can take a moment to think about it. Again, you can jot it down in your graphic organizer, or if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, please do so. So the question to consider is, think of a time your own cultural capital was valued or not valued, and how did that make you feel? So we'll give you a minute to think about that. And we are going to move on to the first of two strategies connected to cultural wealth. The next strategy is a way to amplify the cultural wealth of your students, families, and you as a teacher as the holder of everything. It may be new to some of you. It is a testimonio. Testimonios translates to personal testimonies, and they are rooted in Latin American history and in oral storytelling as a way to share history and experiences. So here we have a couple of definitions about what a testimonio is. The first two definitions come from Jose Medina, who has done some amazing workshops about testimonios and has written a book with his own testimonios. The last definition comes from an article that we will also share with you called Teaching Through Testimonios, Accessing Community Cultural Wealth in Schools. So I want to amplify some of the words that define testimonios for you to keep in mind as we go through this section. First, it's a witness account. It is set against the backdrop of social inequity. It is a first-person account, so based on the person's own perspective. And finally, it serves as a counter-narrative to the mainstream experiences normally shared. Testimonios can be powerful ways to help engage students and their families. The power comes in the sharing and valuing of each other's perspectives, and as stated above, the solidarity that it can build in your own class environment. An important note is that because these can be emotional and can place students and families in vulnerable spaces, they are best done when a safe learning and sharing environment has already been established in your classroom. Specifically, I want to talk about two of the bigger ways it connects to our critical conditions and principle 1 of the EL roadmap. So first, in how testimonials can aid in relationship building. So testimonial serves as a way to switch paradigms around relationship building and what that can look like in the classroom. It's a way to amplify students' voices, their cultural and linguistic knowledge, and helps them see themselves as assets and as a point of pride. It also serves as a continuous way to get to know your students and build that safe, inclusive classroom we're talking about. As critical condition 1 tells us, it's giving students the opportunity to share their story, relating the message that their experience matters, which is so important. Next is the benefit of testimonials to aid in culturally responsive teaching. Research has shown that there are academic benefits that come from accessing students' cultural and linguistic knowledge. We also want to value the learning our students develop from home and their communities. We can connect testimonials to a read aloud, to content being taught, or as a written component of a unit. These also fall in line with critical condition 4, which is making learning relevant and reflecting our students' lives and experiences in their curriculum. Next, I want to give you examples of how testimonials can look for a teacher versus a student or family. I'm sure many of you have done an intro letter at the beginning of the school year, or maybe you're featured somewhere on the website, giving a little bit of information about you. This is a good start, but the purpose of these, the idea of these testimonials is really to start the process of building relationships with your students and families. It's an opportunity to let families get to know more of who you are and why you chose to be this heroic teacher. We offer a couple of prompts, but of course it's up to you and what you feel comfortable sharing with your families. It could be sharing about your background, your own family, your own experience as a student when you were young, why you chose to become a teacher, and what your hope is for your students. During class instruction, it could be sharing an impactful story connected to a lesson or a social component. We all know how much students are curious and love hearing about our lives as the teachers, so this is a way to build on that. And finally, as the teacher, you are being the model of what it looks like to be brave and to share your story, and opening the window for your students to feel it's safe to do the same. Here, we have suggestions of how testimonials can be used with family members and with students. So for families on the left, they can be used to build relationship, of course. This could be teacher to family, family to family. This could also, it could also be where families are gonna write down their own testimonio as a way for you to get to know them better, and even for the families to get to know each other as a part of a strategy that we will share with you later called family cohorts. They could pull from the questions asked during family interviews, or keep it open to anything that they are comfortable sharing. It can connect to class content. A strategy we will talk about is homeschool connections. It offers opportunities for families to make connections and share their stories, and testimonios can be a powerful way of doing that. It can also help families to bond with their children. It's an opportunity to share stories, dreams for their children, and experience modeled by the family is a beautiful thing when they are able to connect that. This could be in the form of a verbal address, or it could be in the form of a letter. It fosters appreciation towards the teacher and all the work you're doing, also between families and towards their children. Finally, it can serve as an opportunity to engage in a family project where they are creating a poster describing who they are and what is most important to them. That can be displayed in a Jamboard or later on in a classroom wall. It could also be used at the end of a unit as a culminating activity. For students, it's also about building relationship. This could be with the teacher or their fellow classmates. It's an opportunity to build on class content by incorporating testimonials to bolster culturally relevant instruction. You are still making connections to content and offering an entry point to share. It's a way for students to verbalize social challenges and a way to help students process emotions that arise from varying experiences. It can be an added piece is to just create self-pride for students, pride in who they are and being able to share it with their teacher and classmates. Finally, it fosters appreciation, greater empathy, and understanding of their teacher and classmates. Also important to note is that testimonials can be done in the home language for the families and students. It's about them sharing their story. And it also connects to the cultural wheel, which we will be discussing in a moment. An additional important note that I just want to point out is that there is no perfect formula for the testimonio. It's simply about speaking from the heart and speaking your truth from your perspective. The purpose is when we create inclusive classrooms that embrace students and their families to be seen, heard, and valued through sharing their own stories and giving students and families multiple opportunities to share theirs. You are creating the space for students to take deeper ownership of their learning by making connections to the content and how it fits into their lives. It also opens space to continue and incorporate this work throughout the whole year. The next strategy or activity, we're calling it, connected to testimonials and leveraging ways for students to share who they are, is the culture wheel. Many of you have probably seen a version of this, and we think it's a great way to connect to this piece. So as an entry point, I want to introduce you to Violet. Violet is in 4th grade. And I want to offer a couple of questions for you to think about as you look at this picture of her and her culture wheel that she created. So the questions to think about is, what stands out to you as things that Violet likes? Also, where can you see areas that you can leverage to spark conversation with Violet? And where can you make connections to content or to her that can offer places for her to have discussions within classroom discussions? So I'm going to give you a minute to just look at her little picture. Okay, so as you're looking, sorry. As you're looking, I also just want to share that this is Violet, who is also my niece. And so I will speak about her also as a family member, since I'm a part of her own inner circle. As you can tell, Violet loves her family dearly. In the making of this with my sister, I was told that she had to find a picture of every family member that she could. So she is really close to her parents. She loves her little brother most of the time, and loves hanging out with all her older cousins, which include my 2 children. She is also really proud of what a good student she is and what a good reader she is. So she reads at about an 8th grade level. And she is also bilingual and speaks Spanish and English, and that's also a big place of pride for her. She is also absolutely enamored with all animals and therefore quite knowledgeable about them. She has already expressed wanting to be a veterinarian. If I had filled out a family interview on Violet, I could also tell you that Violet can be quite shy. And by nature, she's not one to be the loud one in the room. But the minute that you engage her or start talking about animals with her, she is more than willing to share. So as a family member, I know how much I would love to know that a teacher is leveraging these things that Violet loves as a way of giving her an opportunity to shine in her own classroom. And I think this is a simple but visually clear way to see what your students consider most important to them. The culture wheel also connects to students' identities and culture in a low affect way for students to share who they are. As an added, families can also participate in the creation of a child's cultural wheel. And here are some of the added benefits from this activity. These can serve as a class share out for students to get to know each other better. Through the sharing, students are building familiarity about their classmates and learning about each other's interests. This, of course, fosters classroom relationships that students will recall for the rest of the year. Like when one of my students shared that they were allergic to peanut butter, and the rest of the year, the entire class would point it out whenever they felt they needed to keep their classmates safe. So this is a kind of relationship that we want to build, where they are invested in each other and what they like and what keeps them safe. It can also build pride in who they are and build appreciation for their classmates' skills and interests. It also is an opportunity for students and families to amplify the areas that mean the most to them, which gives students a voice to amplify what they want to share. Finally, as a teacher, it gives you a clear visual of what drives your students to then help guide your instruction. As a part of our resources, we will also have a description for this activity, which includes suggestions for implementation. Okay, so we've given you a lot of information so far. We have shared some compelling research, some guiding principles with you. We have also shared family interviews and goal setting. And finally, we have talked about cultural wealth and how it can connect to Testimonios and the culture wheel. So we wanted to give you a little bit of processing time since we're almost halfway. So we will be placing you in some breakout rooms for some small group reflection time. As you share your thoughts, we wanted to give you 2 prompts to help with your discussion. So the questions first are, how can the idea of cultural wealth help you to see your students and families in a new way? And how can you elevate them? The second question, how can you see incorporating family interviews, goal setting, testimonios, and the cultural wheel into your classroom? You will have about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit less, and you will get about a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning when we're giving you back to the whole group. I really encourage you to take a little bit of time to learn something new from colleagues, get ideas from each other. And so also the breakout rooms are not recorded. And so we would love if you're able to show your faces to each other and have a good conversation for a little bit. And then we will see you back here in about 12 minutes. I hope you had some great conversations with your colleagues. We will now move on to our next section. So I'm going to pass it back over to Jaylene, who's going to take us through our next section and a ton of wonderful resources.
So thank you, everybody. I know my little group had a great conversation, and I hope you all did too. It's lovely to hear each other's ideas and how this is going. So our last segment today is about supporting our family partners in learning. And I'm going to ask you to think about a couple things. Thinking about how we're creating channels for that two-way communication, how we're streamlining that and making it easy for families. How are we encouraging families to network? And what kind of opportunities are we providing for that family education, whether it's skill building or supporting them along the way? And of course, I'm going to share some more resources. So before we dive into the actual strategies, I just want to remind us that families are taking on a bigger role than ever in supporting learning, as I'm sure you all know at this point. They really are your partner teachers in distance learning. So the main purpose for tending to this area is that we see how important it is to develop family and caregiver capacity to support the learning. Most families don't have a teaching credential, and so like most of us, they also have been raised prior to the Common Core. A couple of hurdles already on their side. If we can develop them as partners in learning, both the caregiver and the child experience can be better. Less tears, less refusal, less stress, and less frustration at home. So this is a radical shift for us. In the past, families partnered in learning with us by reading to their children at night or maybe supervising homework, but now we're in a completely different context, where families and caregivers are equal and integral partners in the success of this distance learning experience. In the past, we didn't need to make visible the learning process in the same way we do now, but we have to be open about the content we're teaching now so that they can support their child's content learning. We can give our partners some straightforward guidance that helps them know where to focus, what's the priority and what's not. It's important to share realistic and differentiated expectations as well so that all families can be successful. Because we know there's a huge range of support and time that caregivers and families will be able to offer their children. All this to say, creating a plan to support ongoing reciprocal communication with our families is critical. Of course, we need to do this in their preferred language and method of communication. We can't underestimate the good translations needed for parents, and try to remember to elevate the language other than English. If a document's bilingual, put the language that they speak first. It's also important to be flexible with our timing for communication, which means we'll need the support of our district and site leaders. The action of developing partners in learning can become a part of your family cohort meetings if you choose to do those, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, to get started, we're going to focus on ways to encourage this reciprocal communication. There's so many strategies we could focus on, but our focus today for building strong family partnership leads us to share just a few. We'll build on the family interviews that we mentioned earlier. I'll suggest incorporating some homeschool connections throughout the year, and I'll invite you to create these family cohorts in order to leverage families' funds of knowledge as well as your own time to meet with them. Creating a weekly schedule so families have everything they need for the week all in one place is helpful, and of course, translation. These suggestions all tie in nicely with Principle 1 on the EL roadmap, assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, as well as Principle 2, creating meaningful access. So let's dive in. So I just want to quickly remind you about the family interviews. I know we just talked about it, but just a reminder that you can use these types of questions not just to get to know the students and their families, but really think about how you're going to incorporate that throughout the year. It's not necessarily a one-shot or a one-sitting activity, but I suggest keeping a running record of the notes as you learn about the families. You'll inevitably learn more about the families throughout the year, throughout the different conversations and experiences that you have with them. And then using that information to make connections for your students and invite the family stories and experts in as relevant. Sharing their cultural wealth builds pride for the family. Sharing and opens windows into unknown realities for the other students. The next strategy is one example of how to partner families to both build relationships and connections around the content you are teaching. Homeschool connections are definitely not a new strategy, as we know many of you are already doing this. Whether it's a simple prompt for kindergartners to find objects around your home that can be pushed or pulled, as in the example here on the bottom left, the point is not to fill the page with sentences about objects, but to have an experience with a family member. Have that child explore the house and discuss the objects that they investigate, and invite family members to share their knowledge and experiences with their children. Similarly here for this first grade light and sound unit, children were asked to create an instrument of sound. And again, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's about the experience the family has together discussing and creating something. And the entire activity can be done in the home language, even a writing component. We want students to learn about their family's assets, and language is one of those special assets of cultural wealth that they can easily share with their children when prompted. I'm sure most of you already do some kind of family projects, and so the intentionality that we're offering in bringing families together to support their child's learning and really create opportunities for meaningful dialogue in their home language may be the new twist. Research shows that when schools, families, and community groups work together to support learning, students tend to have a more positive attitude towards school. Now that we're literally in families' homes, they're more aware than ever of what their children are learning, yet they still might not quite know how to engage with the content. Homeschool connections can be simple prompts or projects to encourage conversations around the content you're teaching and should engage family members as contributors to the learning. This is a perfect example of critical condition number 4, making learning relevant. We're literally inviting families to share their wealth of knowledge and make connections to their child to connect what they're learning at home and at school. There's neither right or wrong answer, no prior knowledge needed, and it should definitely be low stress. So let's look at a couple more examples. Here's a quick example of a family singing their own song that they wrote after studying the desert. So let's take a look.
You guys ready? Everybody introducing Saguaro Cactus. It's a tale, and it's by Kai, Cruz, and Mommy.
Yeah, what about Hayes?
No, he didn't do anything.
Oh, he was there for support.
Yeah, are you ready?
Go! Oh, nice.
You want to do this? Ready?
Nice landing.
Mommy,
Hayes.
Mommy, go, let's go.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the desert, in the scorching sun, grows a cactus big and tall. It is green and it is tiny. In 200 years and they fall. Oh, saguaro, oh, saguaro, oh, saguaro cactus, producing flowers and rivers.
It's the largest cactus.
Woo! I love this one. It makes me smile every time. I love that they got the whole family involved, and just an example that they didn't need to buy anything fancy. They just wrote a song themselves and were able to perform it together. Before we move on, I just want to pause and say, though, we encourage homeschool connections being related to the content that you're teaching to make it more engaging and relevant. Homeschool connections can also be explicitly about families sharing their stories. You don't have to wait for the ancestors unit in 2nd grade to invite a conversation around their family's country of origin or a simple family tree project. Oftentimes, the invitation to share will prompt lovely conversations and even the creation of an artifact box or mini museum like the example on the right. And can I say just how much I love this simple family tree on the left? As a personal connection, I come from divorced parents and always had trouble with those projects. I have too many branches that don't fit on those black line masters from Teacher Pay Teachers. So I love that this family was able to include everybody that they wanted and make it meaningful for them. SEAL has incorporated homeschool connections into the model since the pilot, and the impact is clear. Families are more involved with their child's learning, and children become more interested in learning from their families and sharing that information with their classmates. Now more than ever, we need to highlight and leverage this aspect of families' cultural wealth. Homeschool connections should definitely be a focal point on the long list of asynchronous work to do. Take a few seconds to jot down anything about homeschool connections that you don't want to forget. And I just want to say we're getting to the halfway mark-ish, a little bit past it, so take a deep breath before we share a couple more strategies with you. If you need to stand up and stretch, you can do that too. All right. So the next strategy that we're offering is family cohorts. This is one that comes out of our dual language programs that we work with, and the need to share specific program information with families while leveraging your time as a teacher to meet with families. Connecting families this way may be the missing link for opening communication with families like those two girls in Salinas who are not getting their basic needs for Wi-Fi met. So think back to the not so distant past when we were back on campus. What did you see? Groups of families huddling and chatting in the parking lot, waiting for pickup at the bus stop. They typically form small groups. And think for a minute with me now, how did these impromptu groups help you? How did you identify and leverage the natural leaders to quickly and effectively share information, get your Kleenex restocked, and make sure you had tamales at the next fundraiser? It's in this vein that we offer you the idea of family cohorts. Family cohorts are a purposeful grouping of caregivers who meet with the teacher not just to share information, but they allow you to connect with families and build your teacher-family relationship in a small group setting. They also foster that natural and critical family-to-family connection. We've also seen pods starting to form by class and race in many places, and this is not what we're talking about. These family cohorts are a co-opting, purposeful grouping and a way to leverage the desire that families have to share in the struggle, and a way for educators to build allies, supports, and liaisons for our ELs and their bilingualism. Cohorts can also help you maximize meeting time and minimize having to repeat important information over and over. They can help you tap into and develop family leaders and advocates who will support the teacher, the class, and the program. And it will also be a place where you can elevate their voices and counter stories, where you can center the needs of ELs and the assets of those English learners and their families. In the next few slides, I'll talk about how to get started, how to build the groups, and how to lead the meetings with a gradual release towards family ownership of this meeting space. So to get you started, I want to reassure you that we created a resource page that will be shared after the webinar. Included is a full strategy write-up for your reference. There's a couple of sample agendas for bilingual classes and some consideration for developing cohorts in an SCI setting as well. And though this strategy comes out of dual immersion, we realized it could be easily adapted and just as useful in our English classrooms during distance learning. So we didn't want to hold out on you. I realized that many of you may be navigating more than 2 home languages, and so we'll share resources for translation in a bit. To get your family cohorts going, you'll need to gather some basic information via a survey. Much of this you probably already know. Thinking about basic prompts like the one on the screen, determining preferred language, meeting times, and if they have siblings in upper grades, etc. We can use this survey to tell us more than just the answers to these questions. In the first 48 hours, you'll know who has and who has not opened and accessed the survey. And this alone is valuable information and will help you determine who to contact first. In an effort to prioritize and center English learners, our suggestion, if you choose to use this strategy, is to start reaching out to EL families who did not access the survey first. You know what to do: call, text, email, whatever it takes. Then move on to the EL families who did access the survey. As you connect to schedule the first meeting, you can ask about technology and logistics and continue to build your master cohort schedule. Then circle back to those who did not fall into other priority areas. If they didn't answer the survey, but they maybe come from a low-income background or historically marginalized groups by race or ethnicity. Maybe you have other bilingual kids. And then finally, connect with those who access it and reported in the survey, but who are not classified as EL. You'll use this information to organize your groups. And finally, please think carefully about if your groups will be language alike or bilingual or multilingual. There's considerations for both ways, and what we want to avoid is language alike groups that last the entire semester and keep parents isolated. At the beginning, it may be helpful as you're developing an affirming space to keep EL family voices together, and this is a reason to consider offering language-centered groups, if possible, for the first few meetings. As you've probably already experienced, we need to be extremely careful that we do not allow English to dominate the meeting space. Everything should be interpreted where possible, using Spanish or the language other than English as the primary language, and knowing that interpretation is a skill. It can be challenging over Zoom, but it can be done. It doesn't suffice to have printed materials in the language and then just talk in English. And we have to remind our colleagues to slow down when we have that interpretation going on. Once you determine your purposeful groupings and flexible scheduling, consider what you might need from your administrator. Some districts are giving teachers additional time, flexing instruction for a week or so that teachers can engage in these types of meetings and interviews. Or perhaps you feel overwhelmed by the idea of doing 3 or so cohort meetings in the first few weeks. Maybe you start with just the EL family cohort group for a few weeks and then reshuffle and incorporate more families. The goal in the end, if you choose to do this, is bilingual, independent groups of families that have developed a supportive network and social connection. A cohort is a purposeful group of families who meet once a week, ideally, with an organized and thoughtful, brief agenda. So let's take a look at a sample of what that might look like. So if you do choose to do it, the proposed structure is simple and flexible. Cohort meetings are meant to be brief, no more than 30 minutes. The agenda for cohort meetings can be divided into 4 sections, each with a unique purpose. You can see in the image a sample agenda. The first thing always is to check in. Similar to what you might do in a morning meeting, it's an opportunity for families to learn about each other and develop connections. The check-in questions are purposeful and thoughtful, neither too deep or potentially unsafe, but also not completely random, like your favorite ice cream. Not that ice cream isn't important, but some of us are lactose intolerant and we don't like to talk about it. So just saying. The check-ins are centered around knowing and connecting families to their child's learning. I want to draw your attention to the light bulb in this next section, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to go through each of these sections of the agenda and why it's important and how you can leverage them. So after the check-in, you have the need to knows. Many of you probably do an inquiry chart as you get started with a new topic or a new unit. Can I get a thumbs up? Do people do inquiry charts like in the image here? So we ask students when we do that to purposefully access their prior knowledge about a topic and what they would like to know about a topic to hook them into the joy, wonder, and excitement of what we're going to be teaching. And the need to knows for families can work similarly. What do my families need to know and able to access and support student learning? What do they already know and I don't need to waste time repeating? What assets do they bring? Who knows? Maybe you have a techie in the group. Asking, what do my families want to know about our learning activities and what needs do they have is important. Perhaps an area that we take for granted is something they are curious, frustrated, or wondering about. Just like an inquiry chart for children, you can prompt and make suggestions, and we can do that with our parents as well. We know they need to know how to use Zoom, they need to know our learning management system, or maybe they need to know a number to call for tech support. However, we also don't want to make assumptions that parents do not have certain assets. We want to create conditions by which they can freely share both their needs and their resources. However you end up gathering this information is of course up to you, but a well-designed system, like making them a regularly visited agenda item, will help you in the long run by developing capacity of families to support their child's learning. The next piece of the agenda we invite you to include is identity activities. Celebrating bilingualism became a huge piece of these gatherings at our dual immersion sites, and though we realize not all the children you serve are bilingual, we still embrace this idea so that our students see and hear about how amazing it is to be multilingual. And we encourage you to make space to honor the different social identities children bring to school. Parts of their identity are visible and others are not, such as economic class or having an absent parent, but all of those pieces play a part in who they are. We realize that identity activities can often be superficial, and so we invite you to go deeper with families and students to really see and honor them. Throughout the year, we suggest making space for families to share a variety of family stories. Share those family funds of knowledge that highlight the cultural capital of our intersectional identities, meaning the discrimination or privilege I experience for my different social identities. For me, being a woman, white, English, and Spanish speaking all affect me in different places and circumstances. In other words, I experience sexism in some situations, but privilege for speaking clear standard English in others. Whereas my Spanish-speaking husband, he experiences the opposite. Our social identities are not exclusive, nor the power they're associated with in this country. Opening all of these conversations and storytelling opportunities with families can be powerful. This intercambio, or sharing of counter stories, is needed now more than ever as we're all stuck at home, isolated from the outside world. The key is making space for our co-teachers, all these families who are working so hard to support their children, the space to have time to share their stories and provide some tools for them to engage with their children in these activities. Another invitation is to preview upcoming home and school connection projects that may provoke these conversations so that families are aware and can have the space to process and ask for support as they later get into these conversations with their children. Often we ask our students to share stories and make connections that their adults might not be comfortable sharing. It's helpful to front load these concepts and questions to families first so they're ready to engage with their children. These types of activities and prompts should be a regular part of cohort meetings with the families. So the last piece of these family cohort meetings, and not necessarily in this order, is the mini lesson. This could be a variety of things, from a skill you want to share, like tips for engaging children in interactive read-alouds, to a special topic like oral language development and why it's important to converse with your child in their strongest language. Again, it may seem like organizing family cohorts is one more thing to do, but as we build our family's confidence and skills in supporting their children's studies, the load will become lighter as the year goes on, and families can eventually take over running the meetings as well, thus freeing up more of your time. So we're going to share a few ready-to-go resources you could use during this mini lessons portion of the meeting to help families feel empowered around the idea of being a co-teacher. Let's take a look. Here's a list of the resources that you'll have access to. And as I share a few, I just want you to think about which one feels right for a group of parents as a starting point. So somewhere that you might start sharing. This first one, we know is about encouraging oral language, and we know that the most important thing we can ask families to do is engage in rich, intentional conversations with their children in their strongest language, as a building block to developing reading and writing proficiency and for overall academic success. This colorful tip sheet provides some ideas of how to engage in conversations with their children, and it could be a simple place to start in elevating the importance of building in opportunities for conversation with their child daily. This infographic is available in English and Spanish. This next tip sheet highlights simple ways to support their child's bilingualism. So we know we're in an uphill battle against the power of English in this country, and we encourage you to share as many resources with our EL families on the importance of being bilingual so they don't lose heart. It's a 5 to 7 year journey in learning a new language, and though we may not see the final result, we have the opportunity to be their cheerleaders along the way. This infographic is also available in English and Spanish, and just a note that the English sheet has tips for parents who are not bilingual but like to encourage their child to be. So you'll have access to both of those. Another strategy offering from SEAL is observation pictures, which is really helping children notice and wonder. So I've been talking for a while, so instead of me talking, let's try it. I will invite you to first take a look at the picture. What do you notice? Feel free to talk to yourself or drop something in the chat. What do you think we were doing? Oh, now I gave a clue already. Yes, if you didn't notice already, that is me, I don't know how old I was, as a child, and my dad. How do you think we were feeling in this picture? Thanks, Adriana, for playing. We were having fun at the beach. Muscles, yeah, we were feeling strong, maybe brave. Yeah, we were protecting our creation from the waves that were coming, for sure. Have you ever had a similar experience? Or what does this remind you of? Fierce facial expressions, yes. We were feeling accomplished. Teamwork. I need a beach day too. Thank you. Yes, we were feeling proud. Thank you for those that are playing along. We encourage this type of strategy because it both builds language as you're having a conversation about the picture, as well as building relationships, especially if you're using family photos in this case to do the activity. So thank you for playing along. Our offering to you is a strategy write-up with more examples and prompts, as well as a ready-to-go letter and tip sheet for families that's both in English and Spanish. And of course, we encourage families to use what they have at home, unless you're going to provide images or artwork or something to observe that goes along with what you're studying. And of course, we always suggest that they engage in conversations in their strongest language. All right, last one. This last worksheet, tip sheet that we're going to share with you is on interactive read alouds. And we know as teachers that this is a key strategy for families to master. So this tip sheet is available in English, Spanish, and Chinese, thanks to our partners who translated it. So I'll just invite you, as you're thinking about all of these resources that we've shared, go slow to go fast is a saying that keeps coming up for me during this season as we continue to grow in this distance learning format. Just start with one and then go from there. So think about which one makes the most sense for you to start with. And remember that you're sharing skills that will get families through, but will last beyond just this COVID season. So another strategy that I would like to mention is really focusing on this aspect of streamlining communication. Our suggestion is to provide a one-stop weekly communication packet with everything parents and students need for the week. One of the data points that Adriana shared earlier was that while 93% of families received communication, only 31% understood the instructions. And so how can we streamline the weekly communication and make it accessible? Let's take a look. Providing everything families need for the week in one shot can be extremely helpful. With a variety of tools like email, text, messaging, etc., as well as platforms, Google Classroom, Flipgrid, Seesaw, it can get overwhelming fast. And even as a tech-friendly person myself, I often get lost in my own world of email, text, Messenger, Slack, and then you add on Facebook, Instagram, and who knows where I saved the dinner recipe that I wanted to make. I digress. So we want to set our families up for success so they have everything they need to support their children in one place. Once you know what you need to share with families, you can use weekly welcoming and organizational messages, including schedules and print lists, actual paper and packets, as ways to deliver the information. They should be easy to understand and follow along. They should help excite and orient families to what's coming. We provide this information in many forms, electronically, paper in hand, via text or school apps, whatever it takes. Everything should be bilingual for families where possible, and we love the idea of including a video welcome that reinforces your belonging and partnership messages. We can make these fun and celebratory. Another hallmark of consistent and easy-to-read welcomes, schedules, and print list is a repeated visual marker to help families specifically think about what you want them to focus on or not in a particular lesson or unit. So let's take a closer look at each of these ideas. The Welcome to the Week cover page or title page and video in this sample does a few things. First, it positions Spanish purposefully at the top of the page for this bilingual classroom and has only the most important information. What week is it, title of the materials, etc. Also, it uses the school logo, not just any image, to connect them to a sense of belonging and school community. And finally, it has a QR code, which I'm learning is very easy to create using a QR code generator, front and center on the page. This QR code has a link to an edited, brief version of a welcome message. So go ahead, pull out your smartphone and open up the camera as if you were going to take a photo. Yes, right now. And no, don't take a selfie. Position the camera toward the QR code, and as you hover over the QR code with the camera, a link should appear near the top of your phone. Tap it and watch a bit of the video. All right, so unfortunately, I'm not going to give you time to watch the entire thing, but now you have it if you want to watch it. It'll also be in your resources as well. These are not meant to be Oscar-worthy videos. They're just quick, brief. Yes, it's okay to make a mistake and not re-record it 5 times. And you can make them bilingual if you have that skill set, or just make sure to check in with families afterwards to make sure their questions get answered. When the families receive this cover letter, they can easily open up this link. So, of course, you can share that as well through a text or your learning management system, but just giving them easy access is key. Notice in the edited clip of the welcome video that the teacher builds excitement, connects to a learning tasks, and reminds parents more is coming in the cohort meeting. So the full welcome message is longer and thanks the families for engaging in the previous week and gives them some more tips. You might feel like this quick video is an additional piece of work, but remember, if we can leverage our relationship building and teach these skills early on, the learning outcomes will exponentially increase as the year goes on. So it's one place that you can bring them in as partners early on. The next piece that I'll share is the sample schedule. And so providing a weekly schedule is really important and a lifesaver for families. Providing a paper copy makes it readable in one page, since many of the Chromebook school supplies are hard to see the full content and can be frustrating. The schedule is about access and equity, another critical component of the EL roadmap. Notice on this sample, there's clearly organized times and directions to synchronous, asynchronous, and independent work, but we don't need to use all those big words. Consider using just straightforward language like live or on your own. And then notice the light bulb. Remember that from our family cohort agenda? Here it is again, cluing families into the need to know items, where to focus and what to not focus on in a lesson. For example, in the read aloud portion, families are clued in to focus on the ideas their children write about, not on the kids' spelling. I want to quickly share another example that gives you a daily look. And this doesn't have all the details, but what stands out to you? Do you notice all the bright colors? Yeah, those colors are key for parents to see, when do my kids need to log on to something live and when are they working on their own? So families are spared all the details because they're in their learning management system later, which in this case is Canvas. And there they can find all the activities with notes on where to focus, what materials students need, etc. Which leads me to take a brief commercial break to mention print lists and journals. We don't want to assume families have all the supplies they need at home and that they can print out worksheets and graphic organizers. So the idea of print lists are learning materials that go home in a packet. I'm sure many of you are already doing this in your districts. We know our learners need to use their hands, their pencils, their crayons, their pens to draw, write, and learn. Many districts have worked out a way for teachers to send packets home. So I'm not going to focus on how this gets to the students, but really what kind of materials do we want to arrive. Print lists are a great way to organize and sort out work. It gives scaffolds and structures for students to follow along. Some of the pages might be worksheets, but the majority should be open prompts, graphic organizers, even blank pages with an invitation to draw. We don't want to assume that families have blank paper, line paper, etc. at home, and we don't want to expect families to print things out. For our younger learners, you might even send sentence frames or story images from a narrative for them to cut out, reorder, and retell as well. As a parent, I can tell you getting these materials weekly in the mail would be a huge relief. It takes the stress off of having to gather materials and arguing on which type of lined paper is okay for the writing assignment. And of course, it removes the additional barrier to thinking and creating that typing often creates. Also, because the print lists were created by grade level at this site, collaboration amongst teachers meant that many hands made light work. In our sample agenda, the light bulb image was used multiple times and gave clear guidance and direction for family members about what to and what not to focus on. And this is an important piece of developing our family skills as partners in learning. Last spring, families and caregivers were spending too much time on details that as educators, we know to purposefully ignore. Because they lean into what and how they learned as children, families were focusing on aspects of our lessons that were not central. For example, For example, correcting the spelling in every word in the sentence in first grade instead of focusing on the main idea or how to express an opinion. Perhaps they sat painstakingly at the screen with a kindergartner, helping them type something out. Many, many tears later, and everybody's crying. And in that case, why not just take dictation or write it down and take a picture? We're all learning that last spring how to navigate this new partnership and how to support parents. And so I'm sharing with you some examples from a school site that developed some common what to and what not to focus on tips by grade level. And they focused it all on the positive. So focus on the synchronous meetings and building oral language, or turn assignments in as is. I'll correct them if needed. These little bits of advice you can give to families and caregivers will really help them lower anxiety and create a more joyful experience in their home. Consider using a visual marker like the light bulb so they know where to look for those tips, and perhaps even collect some tips in a longer shared document as you go so they have a full page that repeats the guidance all in one place. Again, all these resources will be shared with you, the samples as well, at the end of the webinar. So let's take a minute and just think, pair, share. Don't worry, you're on mute and nobody's watching. You can talk to your stuffy, your water bottle, your hand, and just think about what would you encourage families to do and what should they let go of? Take a minute to think, and then you might use this frame. I would tell them to focus on and not focus on. Thanks to those who are playing along. So, go ahead to the next slide. I think this is the last official invitation to draw on your graphic organizer. Sorry, you can go back one, Sharice. Think about these pieces that I just shared. I talked for a while, but think about how might you help streamline communication with your families? How can you support them further in their growth as partners in learning? And so on the right are those strategies that I shared so far. I do want to make a commercial for translation. I know that got asked in the chat room, and I've been alluding to it along the way. So definitely last but not least is the importance of translation. I know most of us are probably using Google Translate, which is getting better, but we want to highlight 2 other resources that you'll probably want to bookmark. I know it doesn't solve every problem, but hopefully it helps. So the first one that we'll look at is DeepL, and it seems to be more accurate than Google Translate and can do whole documents, which is a huge plus. Of course, it's a machine and it's not perfect, but in our current context, getting information out to families in a language they understand is critical. Of course, it would be great to have humans available to translate into every language, but in many districts, they're barely able to keep up with Spanish translations. So in this time when parent involvement is critical, technology is our friend. And DeepL has a box that you can type into to get short translations, as well as this feature in the bottom left corner that can translate entire Word documents in seconds. Again, links to these websites will be in the resources we share after the webinar today. The second that I want to highlight is Talking Points. It comes from an education-specific nonprofit organization and can be contracted by an entire district or accessed for free by teachers and families. There's a website, but the power is in the mobile app. So we talk about reciprocal communications, and one of our goals is to open those lines of communications with families, and this one makes that possible by sending texts in multiple languages. For example, to communicate with Sarah's family, you can set it up to deliver the message that you type in English to her dad in Spanish and the caregiver in Filipino. And similarly, they can respond in their own languages and you receive it back in English. It's amazing. And texting is probably the most accessible for families. I believe it can be set up to deliver emails and surveys as well. But remember, if the goal is two-way communication, texting does allow for that quick response and a growing conversation. Just remember to set your office hours if you don't want to get texts late at night. Also, it is an app to download, and although private phone numbers are protected, always check with your district to make sure it fits within their privacy policy. The last thing I'll ask of you today is to stay flexible. Take a deep breath. Thinking about all that we've shared, I just want to ask you to stay flexible with families and stay flexible with yourself. Providing options for activities, for the format that they do them, the time frame is huge. The more flexible we can be with families, the more likely they are to stay engaged with their child's learning. And also remember to reassure families that we're all doing the best for their child. They're not behind or missing out. We want to keep the lines of communication open and keep our messaging positive, that we're helping accelerating their child's learning rather than filling in the gaps or remediating. Remember that 89% of families are concerned their children will fall behind. So how can we reassure them and continue to offer supports so that they can make the most of this school year? One thing we say at SEAL is to keep the main thing the main thing. So if we're talking about streamlining communication to strengthen family engagement, keep communication clear and concise and provide ways for parents to contact you as needed. So take a minute to reflect. Where has this been a challenge? Think about how we can be more flexible with families or with yourself. Is it time frames, types of assignments, how assignment is completed? Take a minute to just jot a note to yourself, making a commitment to keep the main thing and not lose sight of the big picture. I know that we all want our English learners and all kids to learn, thrive, and lead in life. And with that, I'm going to hand you back to Adriana to close us out.
Thank you, Jaylene. As you can see, we promised you a packed schedule and a packed webinar, and we delivered, I think. Our hope was just to offer you multiple entry points to foster family partnership. We hope that these 4 areas have inspired you and, more importantly, have motivated you to act. So in one of the closings, we found this poem, which we thought just really reflected on what we were talking about for today. And to point out that even though it says parent, we know that we are talking about family. And so I'm going to read it. It's called Unity, which we thought was perfect too. So it says, I dreamt I stood in a studio and watched 2 sculptors there. The clay they used was a young child's mind, and they fashioned it with care. One was a teacher. The tools he used were books, music, and art. One a parent with a guiding hand and a gentle, loving heart. Day after day, the teacher toiled with a touch that was deft and sure, while the parent labored by his side and polished and smoothed it over. And when at last their work was done, they were proud of what they had wrought. For the things they had molded into this child could neither be sold nor bought. And each agreed they would have failed if each had worked alone. For behind the parent stood the school, and behind the teacher, the home. We know building these relationships takes work, and we are in no way trying to downplay that work. We, however, do know what benefits come from this effort. We hope the information we shared with you today offers multiple options to building strong, sustainable family partnerships that create the community institution that our students need more than ever. So for our final little closing, Charisse has one final closing, and thank you, everybody. So Charisse, I pass it to you.
Woohoo! Good job, Adriana and Jaylene. You gave us so much to think about and so many strategies to use and implement. For those of you that have been on our ELRISE webinars before, this is going to be something new. We actually have an evaluation form that we're piloting. So we really hope that you take the time to fill out the evaluation form. The link is being dropped into the chat box. So if you could just click on that and fill it out before you leave, we would greatly appreciate it. As you know, that this is the last webinar in our ELRISE webinar series for this fall. We're offering this same webinar again next week. So if you have some colleagues or some people that you would like to recommend it to, we're also dropping the link to the bit.ly for registration. So please pass it on to your colleagues if they are interested in coming to this webinar as well. Again, you'll be receiving the resources in your email. Please check your spam. We're noticing that a lot of our emails are going to spam after the webinar, so check your spam if you don't get it by Friday. So this is our last slide. If you have any questions or you need some more information, you can always contact us at elroadmap.org. Have a great day. We look forward to seeing some of your colleagues next week and partnering with your county offices for some more offerings starting in the winter. Bye, everybody.